I tried as a new way. I'm gonna show you the tricks I know. Not getting tired of talking, so I made up a show right now. It's time that you made your mind on. And it can sound a little bit strange. Everybody is talking. You need someone ready to change. I will fight like no other every day. I won't stop like the others. I will stay, 'cause it's the right time. I'm feeling alright. I'm flying higher. I'm ready to scream right now. Geeksvana. Don't miss any highlight. There's something you may like. Once I'm ready to fly. I'll tell her to do it right. So I'll tell her to do it right. Geeksvana. We're feeling alright. We're flying higher. We're gonna win tonight. We're here just for the audience. We're gonna show what you're going through. We wanna find you the perfect drone. There's no one else who can help you out. It's time that you made your mind up. And it can sound a little bit strange. Everybody is talking. You need someone ready to change. I will fight like no other every day. I won't stop like the others. I will stay, 'cause it's the right time. I'm feeling alright. I'm flying higher. I'm ready to scream right now. It's better. Don't miss any highlight. There's something you may like. Once I'm ready to fly. I'll tell her to do it right. So I'll tell her to do it right. It's better. We're feeling alright. We're flying higher. Gonna win tonight. It's better. It's better.
Hey everybody, welcome to Geeksvana. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. I hope that your midweek, the hump day, has been going okay. But yes, as I say, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a public consultation from the UK CAA that's actually been running for a number of weeks. There's only a couple of weeks left. It's an important one, so I wanted to talk through with our UK viewers to be able to let you know what's going on and how it will affect you, basically. The easiest way to find it, the easiest way to find any of these public consultations with the CAA, the UK CAA, is via consultations.caa.co.uk, which there is a link in the description to. And this is what you get. This is what will come up in front of you. It is basically a public consultation looking at acceptable means of compliance and guidance material to UK regulation, EU 2019/9947. And it's going to be available under CAP 2378. Now, okay, hang on, right? We've got over 50 people in here, and I know a percentage of you have just gone, CAP, what now? Now, this is an important one, okay? So let me just explain to you what acceptable means of compliance and guidance material is in terms of why it affects you as drone flyers and why we all need to get involved and why I just snorted like a pig live on air. Essentially, you have different layers of advice, different layers of how the CAA and as airspace regulator get information across to you about how to operate safely and responsibly in the UK skies. Now, you obviously have legislation, so you actually have the legislation in place, the Air Navigation Order, and below that, of course, you then have this huge void space that we all sort of float in saying, what is line of sight? You know, is line of sight with my Mini 2 500 meters? Is you know, line of sight with my goggles on? Does that count? Because it's the drone's still within 500 meters, etc. And that's where you need an acceptable means of compliance, which is basically, essentially, a policy document, which is the first time it's actually going to be formalised here in the UK. And you will have two layers of information within that. The acceptable means of compliance, which is basically where the CAA are telling you as a drone operator, do this and you comply in our opinion, in our policy, with the legislation, and then also further guidance material below that. And the guidance material is literally just to give you some extra guidance. We will run through some of this. As I say, you can actually get it here at consultations.caa.co.uk. And now this opened on the 6th of July, so it's been going for a little while, and it closes on the 31st of August 2022. So hopefully by the end of this show, a few more of you will decide that it's important enough to head over there and give them your opinion. We will have a look at the document itself in a little bit later in the show as well. So CAP 2378 will define what the CAA see as acceptable means of compliance for every aspect of drone flight, including things, as I say, like visual line of sight, and it'll be for hobbyists, commercial operators, everybody in between, basically. So once it's in place, you'll have the compliance statement. Now, we've actually recently been joined by Jack, who's the RPAS Policy Manager over at the CAA, and yeah, he's joined us very kindly to talk about this. Now, I'm going to play a few clips from the interview coming up. So the first one here, we have some feedback in terms of who he is and what this consultation is. Enjoy. Today we're joined by James. James, welcome.
Thank you very much.
We've spent time with your colleagues Jonathan and Callum on the channel previously. So could you just introduce yourself a little bit about who you are and what you do at the CAA?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm James. I'm the RPAS Policy Manager in the RPAS team. So post role, which is and the policy management across the unit.
Excellent. So hence why we would want to talk to you today about the current public consultation, which of course, now this is a step on from the previous consultation, where you're actually looking to essentially renew, I suppose is a good way of putting it, the acceptable means of compliance, which is, what does that actually mean? Because of course, you know, we have what we know as the drone code, we have the legislation behind it, etc. But what is AMC? What is acceptable means of compliance?
Absolutely. So the acceptable means of compliance is basically simply the way that you can demonstrate you're complying with the regulation. So the legislation sets out the high-level regulatory requirements that you must follow, and in order to comply with those, we publish a series of acceptable means of compliance to those regulatory requirements, and then below that some guidance material that tells you how to follow the AMC. So it follows in that kind of regulatory flow of regulation, then down to the AMC, and then down to the guidance material. And what happened previously under the air navigation order is we didn't have any official vehicle by which to publish AMC. So we published CAPS, which is basically AMC and guidance material all rolled into one. CAP 722, obviously you and your viewers will be familiar with. And we're now at a stage where we have regulation that sits under what's called the basic regulation, which is a different regulatory framework to our old regulation. And below that, we have a formal structure to publish AMC and guidance material. And that's what we're doing now. So when we left the European Union, we adopted the EASA AMC and guidance material to the regulation. And what this is an exercise in rewriting that for the UK. So okay, all the UK specificities within the CAP 722 series documents, we are pulling into the AMC and guidance material, merging it with some of the EASA AMC and guidance material that was related specifically to that regulation, and combining it all into a brand new document, which is currently out for consultation.
Excellent. And so it's essentially we have that sort of I won't call it messy period, but we have that period of obviously different things happening with the fact that we were moving towards what we thought was going to be EASA, continuing EASA membership ourselves, and of course that then changed and we've come out of it. And as Callum has said previously on the channel, that we've now got the opportunity to refine the legislation, refine all of the articles of compliance, etc., to be able to suit the UK better, because of course we don't have, you know, we know there are subtle changes between obviously what our drone rules and EASA open category drone rules, etc. So this gives us that opportunity essentially, doesn't it, to be able to refine things to a more UK focus.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we move on from our period of involvement with EASA, we have the opportunity through regulatory change, which is what we're doing, or what we did with the previous consultation around the legacy and transitional extensions, to move away slightly from the old requirements, and to be more independent in the way that we create regulation. And in much the same way, we can do the same thing with AMC and guidance material. Our policy positions are acceptable means of compliance to the regulations. We can start to make those work more for the UK market, which is what we're trying to do here.
Okay, so there we go. So that was essentially what the AMC is actually looking to do here. And obviously, as I say, there is a consultation open until the 31st of August on this. This is important because this is the policy, and I'm going to read a couple of the acceptable means of compliance for visual line of sight later and that type of thing, and the A2 CFC areas, etc., to give you a feeling of why it's important. So you're able to basically go along to the public consultation, and line by line you can actually comment on different bits and pieces. So if line of sight is particularly important to you, if you're an A2 CFC holder, that type of thing, you can actually go along to those sections and just comment line for line on what they actually are, which I think is good. Up next, I asked James about what impact this new CAP will have on the rest of the CAP documents. In terms of what is the proposed CAP 2378 that the AMC etc. is currently held under, how would that replace all of the CAPs that we currently know and love, or 2006 upwards, etc., of all of the little sort of handy flyers? Or will we have new versions of those coming off the back of this? Will this replace CAP 722? That's a lot of questions in one.
So not quite is the answer. So this is a brand new type of document for the RPAS community, and for us as a regulator as well, specifically in the UK context. So what we will do with it is we'll publish it, and then at the same time, or certainly very shortly afterwards, we will republish any CAP 722 series documents that have been affected as a result of the publication of the AMC and guidance material changes. And included within that, there'll be changes to the drone code, changes to the test that the drone code contains, and changes to the fact sheets and the website and the other bits of comms that we have around our guidance as well. So there'll be changes to everything. There won't be substantive changes to things like CAP 722 Alpha, which is the risk assessment methodology. That will be dealt with later on next year when we introduce the SORA. But for the time being, that will be republished with some minor updates along with CAP 722 and, as I say, the other documents at the same sort of time.
Okay, excellent. So it's essentially after the consultation, once and if this document gets adopted, then everything else will get updated off the back of that, basically. So there'll be it's essentially keep an eye on the CAA Twitter feed and Skywise, etc., for these things to actually get published, which is great. Okay, up next, I talked to James about what will actually change as far as some of the main changes, and we do talk about line of sight on this one, which is always, of course, an interesting subject as far as how do you quantify it, and of course everybody's vision is different and that type of thing. So he has an interesting answer on this, and we are going to go through the line of sight actually in this CAP document after these clips as well. What would you say are the main changes from the AMC in terms of the hobbyist? You mentioned changes to the drone code and changes to the drone code test, etc. What kind of changes should we expect?
So there are some changes around the definition of visual line of sight. That's one of the main changes probably for the open category, where we move away from set distances where we advise 500 meters, I think was talked about previously, where that was a distance at which it was assumed you had visual line of sight. We put some more guidance in that, particularly from investigations from the Accident Investigation Branch and from Airprox Board recommendations, where we've implemented that and we've adjusted that definition of visual line of sight to take into account other factors, such as your ability to actually see the aircraft properly so that you can control it, see its orientation, know which way it's going to fly when you manipulate the controls, those kind of changes. And there are other changes as well.
You mentioned that there was going to be changes to the test. Is there going to be anything changing from the point of view of who has to take the test? Will the sub 250 now have to do flyer ID or anything, or is any of that kind of stuff changing?
No, so the who has to take the test will remain the same. So any changes of that kind of nature would require a regulatory change, which is kind of outside the scope of this, and that's subject to further rulemaking tasks that we'd look at next year. So this is purely about the requirements that sit below the regulatory requirements.
Okay.
And that might be a good point to mention, actually. Some of the feedback we've had so far relates specifically to things that are outside the scope of this specific consultation. So changes to the regulations, changes to the open category, and so on, which we can't make as part of this work, but we have noted those and we'll feed those into future rulemaking activity where we are in a position to change the regulation itself. One other thing to mention on the hobbyist side, for the Article 16 authorization users of your community, we've enabled the ability to issue a flyer ID on behalf of the CAA by model associations operating under an Article 16 authorization. So instead of having to come to the CAA to get a flyer ID to operate outside Article 16 and then go to the association and get different competence assessment to operate within Article 16, they can now do both at once through the association. So that's one
Superb
benefit we've been able to introduce as part of this sort of process as well.
So that's some good news there for the FPV UK BMFA members as well, that they'll be able to have one flyer ID at the end, which is excellent. That's particularly helps the RC world as well in terms of just paperwork and where and how you can apply for your operator and flyer IDs, etc., or actually specifically flyer ID. So that's obviously good news. Now, as far as the changes that this can bring about, we are, as James said, we are talking about policy here. We're not talking about legislation. So they're not looking for your comments on, I think there should be BV loss. I think this should happen, X, Y, Z. It's specifically more about this document and how they're proposing to set the CAA policy for the acceptable means of compliance, how you can comply with the regulations to give you guidelines, and whether or not you think there should be any changes to that specifically. So it is actually pretty important. But up next, I talked to James about what if you just don't follow the AMC. You're talking about the sort of feedback that you're getting in terms of some of that feedback is talking about legislation, of course, and as you're saying, it is important to mention it now, because the AMC, it should be seen really, well, the way I see it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is I kind of see it as the policy of the CAA, essentially, of saying, okay, this is visual line of sight, this is the legislation behind visual line of sight, and now this is how we have, by the very name of it, it is the acceptable means of compliance. So we're saying if you fly within this guidance, you are therefore complying with the legislation on visual line of sight, for instance. Is that a correct way of looking at it?
Yeah, absolutely right. So the law says you must fly within visual line of sight and sets out some high-level requirements of how you do that, as an example. And the AMC then explains to you how you comply with that. And you need to follow the AMC in order to show compliance with the regulation. You don't have to, it's not mandatory, but if you don't and you choose not to, then you need to propose an alternative method of compliance, means of compliance to the CAA, which we'll have to assess through a separate process. And once we've assessed that as being in compliance with the regulation, and then you can follow that means of compliance instead of ours.
Excellent. And I assume that isn't a simple email to inquiries at CAA. I'm sure there's is that almost like an operating safety case type of thing that was to step outside of the AMC?
A little bit, yeah. It's a fairly lengthy process. Again, it's fairly new to us in the RPAS unit because we haven't had formal AMC before with our regulations. But yeah, it's a fairly lengthy process. There's a form, and if you go to the top of the consultation document that's out at the moment, there's a short explanation there as to how that works and what forms need to be filled in. But by far and away, the easiest way is to follow the AMC that we publish and that's currently out for consultation. If there's something in there that you don't agree with or you think needs clarifying, then now's the time to tell us so that we can do that, so that when it is published and adopted, it's what works for the community.
Exactly, and certainly the last public consultation does show that despite all of the historics there and assumptions, that actually the CAA do listen, because you very much took on board the regulated community's opinions with the last consultation, which was very popular and a fantastic thing to see happen, basically. How has the response been so far? Obviously, you were mentioning before regarding some of the responses that you've had. It's been going for about 6 weeks now. Have you had a good level of response?
That's right. Yeah, we've had a good level. We've had fewer responses compared to the previous consultation, which was expected given the nature of this consultation. We've had about 200 comments so far, so there's plenty of time to get more in. Most of our responses so far have been from REs, from specific category, high-end specific category operators. We've had fewer comments from the open category side of things, so definitely welcome comments from
Absolutely, which is perhaps an understanding thing as well, actually, isn't it? And actually, of the complaints that I get, of the emails and direct messages, everything that I get, this is actually something that I think the hobby community in particular needs to get involved in, because, as you say, it is literally an opportunity to say, okay, this is the CAA's policy on something. I'd like to challenge that with these comments, and if you get those comments enough, then it's something that you're going to look at, of course. So yeah, so that's a obviously an important part of it. Next up, I talked to James about actually how you complete the consultation, which is an important one. We will be looking at the actual guidance material and the compliance document very soon. When does the consultation finish?
It closes on the 31st of August, so we've got about 2 weeks left to get any final comments into us.
Okay, it's a fairly large document, so people may find it a little bit daunting from that point of view. There's 80-something pages, I think, or I won't hold you to that, don't worry. But the way the consultation works is you've actually broken it down in quite a clever way, I think, because you're able to identify the line that you're actually within the document. So when you open up the consultation, the entire document is there line by line, and you're able to put line number and comment, which I think is a very simple way of doing it, rather than the commenter needing to have a particularly technical sort of background or particularly aviation experience or legal experience. Again, I think you guys should be congratulated for that, from the point of view that it's a very easy to use consultation.
Thank you, and hopefully it makes things easier for our community to comment, and it makes our life a lot easier as well if we know exactly what it is people are talking about for each separate line item. We'd advise, when people are responding, the easiest way, certainly that we found, to review the document is on one screen to have the regulation itself or printed off, whatever's easier, and on the other to have the AMC and go through it regulation by regulation. If there's a specific area that affects you as an individual or as an organisation, then you can focus on that area and focus into the AMC and guidance material for that particular part fairly easily, and then comment on that. We have had some feedback from some of our community that there's a maximum number of comments allowed in any one submission. I'm not sure what that number is, but if anyone comes up against that, then the easiest thing to do is to submit those and then start a new response and to submit the rest of them.
So yes, up next, we're actually talking about what is the process that's coming after the consultation in terms of bringing this AMC actually into effect. Actually, no, sorry. The next one I'm actually going to play you very quickly, because I've changed the order very slightly. Just checking if you're awake. Is actually why they're doing this now. Why are you doing this now? We've obviously, from a hobbyist point of view, certainly, we've got the situation now, of course, where things like the sea labels are probably being delayed, and that type of thing. And of course, the CAA have asked the DFT for an investigation into the open category. Why do we need this AMC to be put into place now? Why wouldn't you do this after that investigation?
So the short answer is we will do, and after that investigation there'll be another update to the AMC if a regulatory or AMC change is required. But we at the moment are in a position where we have a regulatory framework that we've introduced, having now left the EU, and we've got the EASA AMC and guidance material that we've adopted in the UK, and that needs updating because our regulation has changed. Actually, from the moment we left the EU, we started to make some small tweaks to it and have continued to do so, things like the minimum age requirements and so on. So we need to update the AMC so that it reflects the UK regulatory framework as it currently is, and that will then be the basis of the AMC that we'll build on as we develop the regulatory framework in months and years to come.
So do you see the AMC being something that evolves over time, essentially? So not something that we're going to see consultations on every 6 months or anything, but as the airspace evolves and as UAM, AAM starts to come into the picture more, UTM, etc. Of course, that's going to affect things like the AMC. So I suppose it's going to have to be an evolution process, really, isn't it, over the next few years?
Yeah, it will be, and there is further regulatory change planned over the next couple of years, and with each of those there'll be changes to the AMC. So we'll be working hard to engage with the whole of the RPAS community as we do that, to encourage the engagement that we've already seen with the previous consultation, to continue to get that so that we can develop the AMC in a way that's safe and proportionate and works for the UK market.
So as you can hear there, this is something which is essentially going to be the communication document, is the way that I would look at it, between the CAA and drone flyers. And if we sit here saying, okay, you know, I want to fly my sub 250 gram legacy drone under the transition, and can I fly over people? Can I fly with zero separation, etc. Rather than actually having to go through and break down Cap 722 and everything else like that, and the air navigation order, this acceptable means of compliance is actually going to specifically discuss those subjects, which we'll come on to in a few minutes, and will actually give you guidelines that actually give you, well, more than that, it will give you the guidance material, but above that, the acceptable means of compliance that the CAA will say, if you're doing this, this, and this, you are complying, which I think is certainly going to be very, very useful for a lot of people that want to get the actual hard answers. So once this consultation's over on the 31st of August, what happens next? As far as the process after the consultation ends, what is the process to bring this AMC into action?
So we're already reviewing the comments that we have received, and we'll continue to do that until we finish reviewing each one. We sit down and review each one individually as a team of us, and we'll then work out what we need to change as a result of that particular comment. We'll then produce a consultation response document, a bit like we did last time, which will explain the broad themes that people have commented on, and what we've done about it, and what they can expect to see when the AMC and GM gets published and adopted in the UK. What then happens after that is it goes back into our aviation legislation and policy governance framework, which involves a number of sign-offs at various different levels throughout the CAA, and it then becomes adopted formally as AMC and guidance material, which means it's then in force, it's in place, and people can start to follow it. So that will start to happen probably around November time, towards the end of this year. And there's a number of other things that need to happen as well. It's not just producing the AMC, it's about the training of our own staff internally who are going to be processing applications on the back of this AMC. It's about training the community, the RAEs. They need time to update their syllabus and their own training organisation requirements and so on. And we're working closely, and we'll be working closely certainly in the coming weeks with RAEs to explain how this is going to affect them. And then the whole of the rest of the regulated community, who we'll be working again closely with through our comms exercises over the next few weeks or so. So they can expect to see further comms through our Skywise system and through our social media channels. That's how it's going to affect them.
Yes, excellent. Which and again, as per previous Geeksvana videos, if you are a hobby flyer or even a commercial flyer here in the UK using drones, then you need to be signed up to the Skywise system, because the drone specific updates are excellent. Not only with things like obviously NOTAMs and restrictions, etc., but updates to the CAP documents and everything else like that. It's all in one place. So it's a very easy way. It's how I often find out about things as well. So. Just as that clip ends, Nightbot starts to go a little bit crazy in the chat there. Apologies, we've just installed Nightbot on the channel, and as per usual, it isn't doing quite what I wanted it to do. But I kind of like quirky Nightbot, but there we go. So let's take a look at the consultation itself then. So as it says here, acceptable means of compliance and guidance material to UK regulation EU 2019/947, so the drone rules. So the overview: the CAA is consulting on the proposed acceptable means of compliance and would like your opinion. The purpose of this consultation is to gather input from a larger breadth of expertise and experience than contained within the CAA alone. There is actually also, as it states here, a legal requirement to consult when they are creating or amending the AMC and GM due to the legal status of the documents. Now, just very, very quickly, I'm just going to show you that if you click on here, providing your views, you can put your bits and pieces in here. Let me just move this up on my screen internally. So we'll put Sean Geeksvana and the email address sean@geeksvana.com, and that's the email address if anybody, by the way, ever wants to reach me. That's the one. What is your organization? Okay, I'm going to do this as a hobbyist, so don't want that. So this is basically the response itself. So here it says each line within the AMC and GM document is sequentially numbered. When you identify an area you wish to feedback for, start by entering the line number. So this is basically where you'll put the line number. So for instance, you'll actually see here on this document, there are line numbers on the left-hand side. So for instance, if you were looking through the documents, which is a sizable document, and you wanted to have a discussion regarding maximum height, which is there, which is in green. So that is a yellow, basically means that's a compliance point. Acceptable means compliance, and green is basically telling you that that is guidance. So let's say here you have GM Article 1, open category UAS operations, maximum height, where maximum vertical height is described within the regulations 120. This may also be approximate to 400 feet for the purpose of this document. If you've got any kind of why you would want to particularly question that, because again, this isn't about the actual legislation, but you would say, okay, line 158, 159, so I'd put that in here. And then you would click here to show what you want to talk about. So conceptual change, an editorial issue, question or clarification, or rewording to improve the explanation. So let's say we had that one and you wanted to put in here whatever you wanted to say about that. And then any additional responses, you can click yes or no for that, and then continue. You can also save and come back to this later, as it shows here, just going off the bottom of the screen there, so that you can actually do this at a later time, which is obviously, because it is a large document, you're able to do that. But we do only have, it's the 17th of August today, we've only got until the 31st to actually get this in. So let's have a look at the document itself very, very quickly. I want to show you a couple of examples of where things are changing slightly. And we need to firstly go to page number 11. And here you have the definitions. This is an AMC article 2.7. So this is one of the AMC articles. Definition of visual line of sight operation, unaided visual contact. So unaided in this context means without the use of any other equipment such as binoculars, telescopes, cameras, or any other such equipment. This does not include corrective lenses which may be worn. And then it obviously has a note there. Provision is made in article 4.1 for UA to be flown in the open category beyond visual line of sight due to the remote pilot using the follow me mode or when making use of an unmanned aircraft observer. So again, specifically putting in there about the fact that obviously you can fly FPV but with an observer, or you can have follow me mode, which is within 50 meters of where you are, but the drone can then, of course, because it's going around behind you, it can actually go out of sight, but you still have to conform to the drone code and make sure everything's safe. And then the definition of visual line of sight operation is in order to control the visual flight path of the UA, it must be kept within a suitable distance of the remote pilot such that they can monitor the aircraft's position, orientation, and the surrounding airspace at all times. So slightly different from existing policy of 500 meters, but also must be within visual line of sight. They're not actually going for a specific distance this time. And looking at the general guidance notes on this, let me just move that slightly so I can see the chat as well. Being able to control the visual, so this is where the general advice, the general guidance comes into things. Being able to control the visual line, visual flight path of a UA means keeping it within a suitable distance of the remote pilot. The distance depends on a number of factors, including eyesight of the remote pilot, the size of the UAS and its visual conspicuity, any navigation lighting on the UA, the weather conditions, fog, sun glare, etc., terrain, and any other obstacles that may obscure the view from the UA of the remote pilot. And then, of course, whether or not the operation's in daylight hours or nights. Now, although there is not specific limitations in operating at night here in the UK, the visual conspicuity of the UA and ambient lighting may affect the distance to which the UA may be flown from the remote pilot. So it's the first time we're getting night into this actual part of this specific guidance. The distance will likely vary on each flight depending on these factors, and the remote pilot should be able to identify at what point VLOS can no longer be maintained. So it's essentially, as I say, the top part here is the actual acceptable means of compliance, and then this is the guidance. So if you wanted to know how to fly within visual line of sight and you followed both of those articles, AMC1 and GM1, then you are going to be conforming, you are going to be complying with legislation in all likelihood. Of course, you could still be, as I've said many times on this channel, you could still be flying within all of the rules, but actually still be doing something else completely illegal, but there we go. So yes, so that's basically how this works. So that's page 11, and looking at the visual line of sight. And Another interesting one, which is one that's an interesting one in terms of clarification that this document will bring, and one that other people may I know that certainly people in my audience will be very, very interested in, is the use of UAS operations in the subcategory A1. And here they talk about the difference between the C1 and C0, and actually looking at the evaluation in terms of, because of course C1, so sub 500 for an A2 CFC holder, you can fly in the A1 airspace, but without intentional flight over people. And this paragraph does actually explain what that actually means and how to be compliant with that, because obviously when you say no intentional flight over people, you sort of, what on earth is that? So that's really what the document provides, and that's really the information that it can provide. It's difficult because I feel like this document is obviously very long, it's obviously very complicated, therefore asking a hobby community, hobby flyers, to respond to such a consultation in that way is complex. I'm not sure I know an easier way of doing a consultation like that, but then obviously it's not my job to make it easier. So my criticism is that it could be a little bit more simple. It is very simple to fill out. Once you get your head around everything, it's very simple. I just worry about those in the hobby who aren't really interested in the sort of, the legislation side of things, but do want to comply and want to respond to this consultation. I would also criticize one other area here, which is that they haven't made it obvious enough where the changes are. So for instance, when we were looking at the visual line of sight text there, they didn't say, okay, this is where it differs. At the moment we say 500 meters and but you must still keep it within visual line of sight. But actually this they say, and I know again this is the first official AMC, the first official document of this type here in the UK, but we do have cap 722 and the other caps. So I think perhaps even some kind of extra note in there, even in red, even a red marker over the page number, just to say this is different, to go look up what the differences are, I think would have been helpful as well. But again, as I say, this isn't looking to change any of the actual regulations. This isn't looking to change the principal legislation, etc. What we're looking at here is the CAA formalizing their acceptable means of compliance and communicating that to us as drone pilots. If you remember, we've gone through quite a changed time here in the UK for our drone rules. Obviously, as we were coming up to the B word, Brexit, anyone remember that? And we believed that we were staying within EASA, so we would fully adopt the EASA rules and move forward. Pretty much the last minute, I think we can safely call it the last minute. We then moved to come out of EASA at the same time as Brexit, which basically means although we were adopting the rules, it was obviously going in as a UK law rather than the UK fully adopting EASA. So there were already subtle changes, and subtle changes have started to, and not so subtle changes have started to evolve as well. And I think that this next investigation that's coming up of the open category that the CAA have requested, have proposed to the DFT, we'll see more changes that are UK specific that will look to help us evolve. How will that evolve? How will that help the hobby? How will that help even lower end commercial drone operators? I don't know. I've got a couple of bits of content coming up on that, so do keep an eye on Geeksvana in terms of how I think that will happen. I think what we're seeing as well, if you look at the CAA, there's job title changes, there's promotions going on at the moment, there's a bit of shuffling happening, and we're looking at titles that include things like experimental and future flight and that type of thing, and looking to integrate what is coming in terms of the UAM, AAM, so drone deliveries, air taxis, this kind of thing, which seems so far away, but obviously they have to start doing that work now. And I'm seeing the changes within literally just people's job titles and roles to start bringing that side of things more into it, with things like UTM needed well before that happens. So I think we're going to go through a period where once the open category investigation has happened, we are going to see some more changes, but they're not necessarily going to be changes surrounding the drone hobby or the lower end commercial operator. I think they're going to be much more focused on what's going to be happening, what else is going to be happening in the sub 400 foot airspace. But that again, obviously is just my opinion on that, basically. So as I say, you need to go to consultations.caa.co.uk. There will be a link to it straight after the show in the in the description, but I've actually just put it in the live chat a few minutes ago as well. So let's have a very quick look at what everybody's saying in the chat. And again, thank you very much for everybody for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's great to see so many of you. We have been knocking the content out recently at a fairly quick pace. Obviously, we had Sunday, we had the news of the US remote ID looking like that's going to be delayed as far as the manufacturer date is concerned. And we had, of course, the interview last night with Mikey, but also for those that missed it, we had Dave Messina and Josh Cook from the FPV Freedom Coalition, who a video that we released yesterday, myself and John Coopy, talking to them about actually what impact there's going to be on FPV for remote ID with things like ready to fly and bind and fly, etc. Yeah, Dennis Mickey, Boyle, good to see you. Have lost the will to live with all the new daily regulations and carrying on as usual. And yeah, and there's, you know, this is a public consultation asking people to get involved in terms of forming this document. There is zero change to the actual regulations from this point of view. Andy Cortez, hashtag I refer to you, Geeksvana. Okay, thank you, sir. I'm assuming that's a compliment. XJet, if they make regulations, hi Bruce, good to see you. If they make regulation too complex, restricted or obtuse, then it becomes ineffective because compliance fails. Yeah, and that's a really important part of it. And I think this document is good, and the consultation is fantastic, and it's good to see people engaging in it. I'm not surprised they haven't had that much engagement because of the sheer size of the document, and you know, it is a bit more complex than someone that just wants to go out and fly their FPV drone or their Mini 2. But what will come from this, I think, will be very useful because it will update CAP 722 and all of the CAP documents that are out there, as James pointed out. So I think that it might actually bring some clarity in the end to the CAP that you hold in terms of the drone flight that you're going to be carrying out. That will hopefully end up being slightly simpler. Go on, Bruce. If I paint my drone like a rainbow and have a good slug from my bottle of gender fluid, can I claim discrimination if they're trying to find me for flying without a spotter? I think that's a little bit too existential for tonight's live stream personally, but you know, we'll have to wait and see. Now there's over 90 of you watching. Thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate it. Could you all do me a massive favor? I don't often actually ask this often, but could you hit the like button or the dislike button if you're not enjoying this? But if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, I would really appreciate it. That's Goth Guy Drones. Hi, hope you're well, sir. I personally think we need BV loss on sub 250 live camera or FPV drones, as a quarter of a loaf of bread weighs about the same. So I feel that they are safer even outside VLOS. Okay, I mean, VLOS is a fascination in my opinion, in terms of everybody, you know, visual line of sight, beyond visual line of sight is always, it's a bit like the auditor thing where, you know, a few auditors fly drones and everyone's talking about it. It's a fascination in my opinion, and it really doesn't sort of benefit the hobby to have unrestricted BV loss flights at the moment. We don't have the systems in place. Could we, once perhaps the Altitude Angel trial, Project Skyway, is proven to work, if it does work, then yes, we very much could have beyond visual line of sight corridors and even much wider areas in the future. Then I think, yes, we're going to be able to have that conversation again, but I think it's going to be a while, frankly. And looking at other comments here in the chat. Any questions, do at Geeksvana. It doesn't just have to be on today's subject. If you've got any other questions regarding regulations or anything else going on the channel, please do ask. PD Tech, hi, good to see you. I'm going to stick feathers on my drone and paint eyes and a beak on it and go fly my pigeon. Well, then it would be technically like every other pigeon, because as per the live chat in the interview last night and on my Discord channel today, it appears that pigeons, I found out, are not real. I didn't know that, but obviously I'm joking, everybody. But yes, I'm joking algorithm as well that can hear that. Let me just have a quick look at anybody else saying here. B9Y, it's going to be a really bad idea to put hobbyists and professional pilots in the same category. We as professionals have way more to lose. The end result is we're naturally going to be safer. I actually, I see your point whilst disagreeing. whilst running this channel for the last couple of years, I have spoken to and met and interacted with thousands of pilots from around the world, thousands, and drone pilots and manned aviation, but we're talking drone pilot here, of course. And actually, I could honestly line up hundreds of so-called commercial operators who hold certificates from their nation's CAA, FAA, etc., from their airspace, and actually that don't know enough about what they're doing. That actually I feel that they feel themselves, although they've gone through the training, they've still got lots of questions because they don't feel safe, they don't feel ready, etc. So I don't think that's necessarily. I think that's a sweeping generalisation, and I've met lots of hobbyist flyers who are extremely safe and who are extremely concerned. And you know, safety isn't just about regulation. Safety isn't just about following one of the Geeksvana videos or anything else like that. Safety is a much wider context, and I honestly believe that the vast majority, the vast percentage of drone operators want to be safe. And I think we need to also, you know, we have all sides of the argument, all sides of the opinion base here on this channel, which is why I love the audience that we have. But I think you also need to start separating where somebody says they don't agree with a regulation or all of the regulations or guidance, etc., with that person automatically being unsafe. And I think we need to, you know, the word safety is something which is not necessarily hung on a regulation. There's plenty of drone rules here in the UK that I look at and I think, okay, I always follow the drone rules, hence I put videos out on them, etc. But I wouldn't necessarily say that one's for safety or this one's for safety, etc. So that's just my personal opinion on that one. XJet, the majority of drone versus aircraft incidents have involved commercial operators. Yeah, I mean that is sadly true. 100%. Legwork Bill, good to see you. Hope you're well, sir. They never said you can't fly your drone whilst riding a unicycle whilst juggling chainsaws, so that must be perfectly safe. Well, yeah, I mean, and this comes down back to the conversation I had with Callum Holland from the CAA regarding A2CFC and whether they can fly over buildings and cars and that type of thing. Whereas they also don't want to go so far as stipulating every single rule, so actually restricting flights so much that you can't do anything unless you have all of these ducks in a row. And then of course that makes things very difficult for everybody from hobbyists and commercial flyers as well. Keith Wilson, I feel more rules may lead to less people following them just because they'll lose interest in doing the right thing, ? Yeah, and I can understand that, Keith. And again, obviously, as I say, with this particular one with the AMC, we're not looking at new rules as such or new regulations. This is just essentially how the CAA will be able to communicate how to follow those rules, so it's an acceptable means of compliance. But yes, I completely agree with you from that point of view. We have to be very, very careful that we bring the regulated community along with the regulator. And I hope that the CAA and the FAA in the States see that and realise that as we move forward into UTM and into UAM, AAM, whatever you want to call it, with the air taxis, etc., and drone deliveries, that they don't leave the regulated community behind, because then suddenly what you're going to find is a situation where people are not following regulation, because as you say, it's yet more, basically. Joel Lima, hi. Can we take off from public pathways with a DJI Mini 3? What about suburban high streets? Also about overtrained rails? Thank you. Hi, Joel. Great to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. Yes, now, this is an interesting one because, of course, you have a bit of a fragmented breakdown in terms of you are, you know, in the drone code, it says about looking for signs and that type of thing, and ensuring that you're aware that there are no bylaws stopping you from taking off, etc. So all of that aside, if you're taking off from a public location, you're aware that you're not on private land, etc., then yes, you absolutely can take off. What you need to be careful of with things like public pathways is that you're not causing obstruction. And of course, your takeoff landing position is safe, which can be very, very difficult to achieve on a pathway, particularly if you're talking about urban areas, but obviously you're talking about suburban high streets, etc. it's all about the risk assessment, really, and I have a video coming up on this about how to risk assess sub 250 flights in urban and suburban areas to ensure that they are safe and conforming to the UK drone rules. For instance, footpaths that are across farmers' fields, etc., you'll often find that they are specifically stipulated as rights of way, and you're not supposed to loiter, etc. It stops, it stops people having picnics in the middle of farmers' fields and that type of thing. So there is nuance to it. You've also got the issue, of course, that if they cancel bans takeoff and landing from their particular area, then if you're asked to move on, you need to move on and that type of thing. But yes, so loosely, yes, subject to lots of caveats, unfortunately, but and the main caveat is that you are solely responsible for that flight, so be sure that you're happy before you take off. But it really is, and you say suburban high street, so you're not trying to be provocative by saying the middle of a city centre high street, etc. And yes, it is about that. Is if it's a suburban high street, you've got a good location to be able to take off and land from, and that can be secured, even if lots of people start moving around, etc., start blocking that, whatever, car parks and that type of thing. So think about those type of situations, and you should be fine. Clicking up here again through the chat. Why have the campaign against Foot Launch One? Hi. Why have the campaign against aviation not sent out the consultation to those of us who are registered? Only 90 viewers, and there would be more pilots if I'd known about it. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why whenever I get these updates through from the CAA, I do try to bring them to everybody and spread the word through the audience. If you register on the CAA Skywise website, which I'll ask Andy to find the link to and put in the chat, that's notifications for all sorts of things, including NOTAMs and that. Well, it actually covers the sky, so it's balloons, it's aircraft, it's everything. But you can actually ask for updates just on drones, and this did actually go out as a Skywise update when it first launched. But I agree, I think an email specifically to registered drone operators I think would be an excellent idea, and that's actually one that I'm going to take back to them and give them feedback on. So I think that's a very good idea. Jonathan Jackson, good to see you. Hi. Geek, you guys ate building drone highways, which shows you are more into the advancement of drone flight. The US is just now ready to implement the rules. Yeah, I have to say that one of the advantages that I've seen in terms of us coming out of EASA following Brexit is the UK airspace does have that little tinge of innovation about it, and something different might start to happen soon, which I have to say I am personally very, very excited about. But also I think that we need to start seeing that move on a little bit and also be more accessible by hobbyists and lower end drone operators. What I don't want to see is this to become a bun fight for air taxis and drone deliveries. I keep saying air taxis. I apologize, but it's one use case that we can all imagine, but also use cases that I think are going to have a lot of stumbling blocks in the future. And what I don't want to see is the hobbyist and the lower end commercial operator to be held up in what they're doing, and to have regulations for something that is going to happen or could happen and that type of thing. That does frustrate me. Legwork, air taxis, $1 million idea, Mavic 2 as a hamster air taxi. Yes, I think you have to analyze the market for that and how many people would need to or like to move their hamsters across the UK air skies. But yeah, we have to wait and see. Fly Sky drones. If sea-label drones are put back again, would people be happy to do another A2 CFC if theirs runs out? Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the things that I have put in my comments regarding that on the A2 CFC side of things is that they should allow people with drones that are going to be C2 labeled or even C1 labeled. So the Mavic 3, for instance, I think you should be, as an A2 CFC holder, you should get the 30 meter and 5 meter A2 CFC benefits now. I think it wouldn't take too much for the CAA to actually produce a list of approved A2 CFC drones. So rather than, we still have our sub 2 kilogram things, so our old Mavic 2 Pros and everything else like that, we can still fly with the 50 meter rule. But actually, to get access to that 30 and 5 meter separation, why not have an approved list? Why not have a list list of drones. The DJI Mavic 3, it's sub 900 grams, certainly. It might even be sub 800. Someone let me know in the chat. But that drone does have the low speed. It's ready for the C markings. DJI have told us that. And actually, therefore, I think we should have a list where we're able to say, yes, here it is. You can use this list of drones with your A2 CFC, with the much lower 1-to-1 rule, etc. 30 and 5 meter separation distances. It's a good point, Tony. Electron gap, I found with my Mini, early Sunday mornings are good for in towns. Yeah, absolutely. And actually that's an interesting one as well, because flights over people, flights over crowds, of course, you still can't do with a sub 250 here in or gatherings in the UK. And of course, that can start to wipe out certain airspace. But of course, Sunday morning when you're in a town centre, as Electron Gap says, can be a really useful time to fly, because the drone rules in the UK of that type are fluid, you're able to assess and react to the actual situation that's happening. Let me have a look else here. Samuel Satega, can I fly in London outside the restricted areas R156, R158, 159, good old ones, without having to get a NAT certificate? Yeah, you can fly in London as a hobbyist without having to do anything else. One thing I would always recommend is that if you are within what us Londoners would call London, same us Londoners, I live in Surrey, but I lived in London for a long time. If you are flying in proper London, in one of the metropolitan boroughs, etc., that's built up, I would dial 101 and make sure that you notify them of your drone flight, maybe even the day before, something like that, because it can take a while to get through to 101. That's a whole other debate. But yes, so you can, absolutely, but you need to be very, very careful about it. I have a video that I'm recording on that. There's like 4 or 5 videos I've mentioned tonight that I'm recording. We've got lots in the edit bank as well, on specifically on this. But yes, you are able to. And in fact, Fly Sky Drones, who's in the chat, has done a couple of flights. I don't think you even did that as your A2, did you? I think you did that while you're purely a hobbyist, but it might have been with his A2 CFC. But yes, you are able to do that, especially sub 250, especially sub 250. Steel City drone pilot, hi Paul, hope you're well. I'll fly hamsters if anyone wants this service. There you go. Paul is a certified hamster flyer, and will fly hamsters across Sheffield at short notice, I'm sure. Miss Stevie Woo, great to see some new names in the chat as well tonight. If you are new here, please do hit the subscribe button, and do remember to hit the like button as well. What if you fly custom cut FPV frames that are not produced by corporations or commercially released? Yeah, self-build FPV here in the UK, you've got a few options in those terms. At the moment, of course, you've got the transitional period, which helps, but you've also got things like the Article 16 authorization, which if you're a member of FPV UK BMFA, you can fly in leisure locations, so parks, sporting fields, that type of thing, with 15 meters separation from takeoff, 30 meters whilst in flight, and that's a bubble, so you can actually fly over people, even if the drone is and with FPV will usually be over 250 grams. So yes, we do actually have on our channel, we do have an FPV UK drone rules special video, so I would recommend going and having a watch of that if you have the time. And Headley Thorn sub 900. Yeah, I thought it was sub 900. I couldn't remember it was sub 800, but there we go. Electron Gap, I managed to 3D scan my whole town centre over a few months going on a Sunday morning, planning out where I will stand and be able to see, having a plan B if that wasn't available. Absolutely. And that's one of the things that's one of the first things that I would always recommend, is that have that plan B in mind, do the risk assessment, think about, and you don't, when I say do a risk assessment, you don't have to get out, a notepad and pen and sit there for 5 hours, but actually just take a look around and see what's happening. Where is the flow of people? It's a Sunday morning, there's a church over there, the car park's full. So at some point, that service is going to kick out and have a lot of people coming out of there, and that type of thing. Really having a look around and knowing what's happening in your circumstances. One thing I would recommend on risk assessments as well, especially as a hobbyist flyer, before you fly, take a quick panorama of where you are. If your phone has the panorama setting, click it going and just turn around and show it. Obviously, it's going to be time stamped to show, because that can also help you in terms of if anything does go wrong, to show that you did risk assess, and to show if you don't have panorama, just take a few shots of the area where you're taking off from and that type of thing, and also of the traffic flow and that sort of thing. I actually do that myself, just to completely cover myself, and it's part of the risk assessment. And then if there's no issue on the flight, no issue comes up in the preceding days and that type of thing, the police banging on my door saying, hey, why were you flying your drone, then I'll then delete those photos off my phone, but at least I have them as some form of evidence that I have actually risk assessed, and to prove what the area looked like when I was flying. Because of course you take me back there on Monday morning, when everyone's going to their office, and it might look like it's impossible to fly safely there. So just one tip there. Enchanted Life Path. Now there's lots of questions here, so I think we will be running a drone rules Q&A at some point as well, but I'm happy to answer a few more of these questions this evening. Hi, can I fly my DJI Air 2S, great drone, over the liver buildings in Liverpool city centre? I'm an FPV member and not A2 CFC. Enchanted Life Path, no. You will not be able to do that. That particular drone would need an A2 CFC 100%. The Article 16 won't actually help you there, because although there's actually the river side, isn't there, or the beach side, quite close to the liver building in Liverpool. When you're flying under Article 16 within a leisure area, so let's say you took off from that, you argued that was a leisure area, and you took off from that beach next to the liver building, then you can only stay within the volume of that leisure area. So I can't take off from my local park and fly out over the houses to get images of something going on over there, etc. You need to stay within the volume. So for that particular drone, which is an awesome drone, I have it myself. It was on my shelf, but actually it was out flying yesterday, so it's not in its cage. You would need the A2 CFC, and then you would need to ensure that you got the 50-meter separation. So it would still be a tough flight even with an A2 CFC with the DJI Air 2S, mainly because of the separation to uninvolved people that you would still have to do there. Now, change that around, sub 250, something like the DJI Mini 3 Pro, and once you've risk assessed and once you've made sure that flight's going to be safe and responsible, then you could possibly do it. And for that, you don't even need an A2 CFC. So yeah, that's one to think on there. B9Y, hi again. The issue with BV loss is that the second you look at your phone, you've lost VLOS. It's a poor rule, really poor. I actually think distance should be the rule. Who's really going to fly so far away? Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually. And I had this discussion with a viewer on the phone, actually, about a week ago. Visual line of sight and visual line of sight rules here and in the States, here in the UK and in the US, does not mean you have to be looking at your drone the entire time. I'm looking at a painting of a Spitfire on my studio wall right now, and I do not have to be looking at that Spitfire for it to be in visual line of sight. I'm looking over at my screen now. It's still within visual line of sight. You, of course, have to be scanning the airspace around that Spitfire or drone, as it would be, to know what's happening. And I would say that certainly in my GVC course we were taught sort of 70-30 split, so you shouldn't be looking at the screen too much, but of course it would be unsafe to just look at the drone. You need to be looking at the telemetry to tell you how far away it is precisely, and height and that type of thing, and also change settings for photos and video, etc. But you should absolutely predominantly be looking at your drone, but you don't have to be looking at it the entire time. That isn't what visual line of sight in the context of regulations here and in the US actually means. I'll just see if anybody else has any more here. Phantom and the drone, how many of you have had to pay to fly in certain airspace for commercial work? Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually, and I've been starting to get a few bits and pieces, including from East Midlands Airport, people who've tried to gain permission there in the FRZ, because this is starting to become more of a thing where, of course, you've got companies like Altitude Angel trying to use their digital permission to fly within an FRZ, which I did trial in Gatwick, and it did work, but with a few stumbling blocks, but that's exactly what happens with trials. But you also conversely have airports that are actually charging just to apply, not even to grant the permission, but actually just to apply, which is clearly a tactic to put you off. And of course that shouldn't happen. So it's interesting. Yes, as Matty says, some people on YouTube make their entire channel around range tests. Makes no sense, but it is what it is. But yeah, and you know, it's the old argument, isn't it? If people weren't watching it, they wouldn't make the videos. But there we go. XJet, Bruce, hi. Always sharpen your prop blades before you fly. Dull blades hurt more than the sharp ones. I do not support that particular piece of advice, I would just like to say. Mr. Law Williams, UK, War Machine, VLOS is important because you never know what's around the corner or behind something. Absolutely, I completely agree with that. And VLOS is also important because you need to know what's actually happening in the airspace. It's very, very important, in my opinion, to be able to do that. Sorry, I was just checking the stats. Anybody getting any flickering in the stream? Because I've just had a small warning come on stream, but we'll get going in a few minutes anyway. Yes, Andy Cortez has just said it as well. Let me just check what's happening here. It seems to be on the YouTube's end because we are 0 dropped frames, everything looking good. But hopefully, if we refresh, let me have a look here. That will stop happening. Okay. Yes, if you refresh your browsers, then that should work. Very strange because it's my OBS here and all the outputs is working very, very well. So yeah. As Alice Mean says, low battery. 50p in the meter from Tony. Yeah, thank you very much. And XJet, too much goodness for the available bandwidth. Well, you know, thanks, Bruce. Is that an official endorsement? Yes, as Matty says, better now. Yeah, it does seem to have cleared my end. I have a little tiny screen on my YouTube studio when I'm going live that shows a very helpful image of what you guys are actually seeing, and I could just see spooling come up on that. So before that comes up again, I'm going to say again, go to consultations.caa.co.uk. I'm going to put it in the description as soon as this live stream has finished. We will do, as people have asked a lot here of questions, etc. We will do an open Q&A on the UK drone rules, so I can answer your specific questions. That is actually the one specific reason, the main driving force behind me opening this channel. I was a hobbyist drone flyer. Fortunate to say now I do work commercially. I won't say professionally, commercially in drones now. But back in the day, I wanted to know, okay, can I fly my Parrot Bebop 2 drone here? Can I do this? Can I do that? And I just couldn't get answers, which is one of the big reasons why I started this channel once I gained a bit more experience and gained some knowledge, because I wanted to pass that knowledge on. And thankfully now we've got some great access, as anybody in the press would, to regulators, etc., to the police, that type of thing, to be able to hopefully bring some more of that advice. So we will do an open Q&A on the UK drone rules very, 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 very soon, perhaps next week, so that we can answer your questions. But there we go. That's the show tonight. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Go enjoy the rest of your week. Get out flying your drones. Any questions? Sean@geeksvana.com. I'm always happy to answer questions specific to your situations or your flying intentions. Intentions sounds a bit thing there, but there we go. If you could, on the way out, the 90 odd people that are still watching, if those of you that haven't hit the like button already could smash that like button on the way out, I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you next time on Geeksvana. Thank you very much. Bye bye.